Hi, I'm Don Mackey, LCAT Director. Welcome to the Fiscal Outlook for the Town of East Longmeadow for 2014. I'm joined by Russ Denver, Chairman of the Town Appropriations Committee, and Eric Madison, Chairman of the Capital Planning Committee.
Morning.
Gentlemen, welcome back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can't believe another year's gone by, but maybe we're in a little better place. First of all, let's just talk briefly about the roles that you play in the budget process. Town meeting coming up on May 20th.
Okay.
The town will vote on a roughly $52 million budget and change. And just if you want to review briefly what role you play in that process.
Sure. The Appropriations Committee is established by the town charter and bylaws. Consists of 7 members, and they are all appointed by the town moderator, Jim Shields. We all have terms of staggering 3 years at a time. And primarily our role is to prepare and recommend to the annual town meeting a balanced budget for the town of East Longmeadow for the fiscal year, which starts July 1st and runs through June 30th of each year. It's a very lengthy process that we go through, a meeting with department heads and boards and committees. And then the other major function we have is to approve, along with the Board of Selectmen, reserve fund transfers. So there's a reserve fund of anywhere between $300,000 and $450,000 established each year for extraordinary and unforeseen expenses. And we have pretty much have the final say on what can be transferred from that fund each and every year.
And just capital planning.
Capital planning is also addressed in our town charter and bylaws. And essentially our role is to look at any project that includes the acquisition of land or the expense of $20,000 or greater with a life expectancy of 3 years or more. And that's by the bylaws. And really our role is to vet out each project, to look at and make recommendations in terms of capital projects. And then specifically, we have to forward to the Appropriations Committee a recommended program, if you will, of projects along with a budget for inclusion into the town budget.
So just procedurally, your recommendation as a body is to the Appropriations Committee? So their recommendation is actually part of yours, or do you recommend to town meeting itself? Well,
we are regulated by the bylaws to submit to the Appropriations Committee our recommendations with a budget for inclusion into the overall town budget. Now, obviously, we can't. The two committees have to work together. If we don't work together, we're not going to bring forth a balanced budget along with recommendations. So, so it just makes sense that our recommendations and budget be forwarded to them.
So, I guess I feel compelled to comment a little bit because we've gone through a long period. You generally start sometime in October to begin to hammer out the budget. You spend a lot of time meeting with elected officials, town department heads, reviewing in incredible detail their budgets, their plans for the year, trying to find where they could find some savings. You're very, very immersed in the process. And in last week's reminder, there was a headline story about a budget compromise in the town of Longmeadow between the school committee and the Board of Selectmen, which they've been struggling with for some time. And in the article, no mention at all of a finance committee or appropriations committee. And it actually raised the question for me, well, why not? What role do they play? And in the Longmeadow town bylaws, the role of the Appropriations Committee is very limited indeed, and it's really up to the selectmen to prepare the budget. I don't know, your thoughts, you've been at this for some time now. I think people might read that article and it might reinforce the idea that, in my experience, people have had that the selectmen are sort of in charge of the town budget. Misperception.
Yeah, there's a great misperception by the public regarding that. The way the charter of East Long Meadow is set up, there's really, I would say, three major entities that control the majority of the town budget. First, you have the school committee, which controls about 60% of the total dollars that are spent each and every year for educational expenses. Then you have the Board of Public Works, which controls a good amount of money for water and sewer, but they also maintain all the town buildings and maintain all the properties of the town. So there's a lot of things associated under the Board of Public Works. And then you do have the Board of Selectmen that control the primarily town hall departments and police and fire departments. So those three entities, among them, primarily control almost 100% of the recommendations to the Appropriations Committee. And then it is the Appropriations Committee to kind of take the big picture among all of those and try to format and formulate a decent budget that represents the interest of the whole town. I think the thing that works in East Long Meadow is that you do have the Appropriations Committee taking a big picture. Mm-hmm. And we are not elected, we are appointed. There are no one that we need to deal with any kind of special interest. Our special interest is really what we believe is in the best interest of the town. And the way the committee is established, we have an attorney, we have a fire chief, we have former bankers, we have business owners, we have people with kids in the school system. I mean, it's a very diverse group. We have, we have younger people on it. We have older people on it, and it's a good cross section of the town. But I think the other thing that I want to just let people know is we believe in communication. As an example, I mean, you mentioned we kind of start this process in October, and what we started a number of years ago is we ask all the departments to come in one at a time. And this is before we give them any budget forms to start working on. And we say, okay, what do you think's going to happen next fiscal year? What are things that we should be aware of now so we can plan that when you come in with those changes, we'll be aware of and there's no surprises. I think the departments and the committees like that, so that then when we get their budgets, okay, we understand what they need. And this could be changes to state law, changes to federal law that are going to require additional expenditures, or there's large equipment that is kind of running its life cycle, and they're going to need that through capital plans, so we can, we see these things coming down the road. So there's a lot of communication that goes on, and I think that's really kind of the key to make the process work smoothly.
I think where the committee works really well is each of the boards that Russ mentioned, be it the school committee or the select board or the Department of Public Works board, they all have a specific and narrow interest. And from the budget process, they're going to advocate for that interest. For example, the school board is going to advocate for the school budget, as they should, as each of them should advocate for their specific interests or areas under their control. Where our committee, or where the Appropriations Committee comes in, is we have as Russ used, the big picture. We're able to formulate that budget, taking the whole town into consideration and not any one sector of the town budget. So from that perspective, it works really well, and we can then recommend to the voting body a budget that's balanced for services throughout the community and not necessarily weighed heavily in one direction.
And part of that communication, and just, certainly in the past and recently, the past couple of meetings that you've held, you've met and are still, have been up until, was it Thursday night? Mm-hmm. In the process of trying to achieve that consensus or that balance or that fairness among people who, with limited dollars, really had competing interests. I mean, it's a remarkable process to see.
I'm going to tell you, just as an example of the communication that I talk about, and we keep everybody open and the whole process is transparent. About 4 years ago, when the state was reducing the amount of local aid that we were getting to help run the town was spending almost $1 million a year in what they call free cash to balance the town budget. And we, as the Appropriations Committee, said we can't continue to do this because as Eric likes to say, your own household budget. You can't keep overspending your reserves, or you're not going to have any reserves left when you really need them for an emergency. So we kind of developed a plan that we were going to start reducing our reliance on free cash every year. And that first year we used $1 million. Next year we used $750,000. Then we went down to $500,000. And this year we're recommending $150,000, which is a little more aggressive than what our plan was to use $250,000. And then next year our goal is to use no free cash to balance the budget. Now, we have been telling every elected board, we've been telling every department head what our plan is for 4 years. So there should be nobody who's surprised as we keep reducing that amount. And then people have had to submit budgets based upon that, knowing that we're not going to continue to use that, so we have a balanced budget just with the resources that we have in front of us.
So let's start with the big picture then, because we could get into probably 5 or 6 important discussion points based on what you just said with respect to the free cash amount and the change, which we'll get to, of how you got from anticipating maybe in October the 250 down to the 150.
Okay.
But big picture, overall, what's the state of the town's fiscal health?
I think we're in excellent fiscal health. I think we're in a perfect position to do exactly what Russ described, in fact, to position ourselves for year after year developing and presenting a sustainable budget. I think obviously, you know, the growth of the town is a concern as the housing market picks back up. We're seeing a lot more development going into town. That always equates not only into additional revenue, but it also equates into additional demand for services, be it inspectional services or school department or what have you, new streets, increase the DPW workload. So I think we're in about as good a position as we can be to take on that growth in our community. I think we just have to do it in a balanced manner.
Yep. I would agree. I think we have a healthy reserve. I think the town has taken steps to kind of reduce their expenses at every opportunity without really impacting the services. As an example, you know, interest rates on borrowing have been, you know, coming way down, and the town has refinanced its bonds, which is the borrowing, probably at least 4 times in the last 4 years. That has saved the town hundreds of thousands of dollars. The Board of Selectmen adopted a special piece of state legislation which reduced the health care costs for retirees and town employees, so they've done that. There's been lots of energy efficiency measures that have been put into town buildings, and that has certainly, you know, leveled the cost, but also reduced the amount of usage for, you know, electricity and natural gas. So they've made some real efforts to kind of control expenses. And I think, you know, I wish more people knew about those opportunities. I think they would be happier with some of their elected officials knowing that they're actually paying close attention to those things.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think one of the benefits from my perspective of being able to do this and have this means of communicating to people is I see, because I interact with elected officials on every board and really all the town department heads, and there's a remarkable effort consistently, day in and day out, I think, on the part of people to look at, you know, what's a solution to that? How can we save money there? What's the most efficient way to do that? And I think that a lot of that is not really visible to the public, and I think it would change people's perceptions about, you know, how effective government is in this town. So, in terms of the overall economy, the growth rate of the economy coming back in, say, Massachusetts, state finances, looking 3 to 5 years ahead, you know, yes, we've positioned ourselves for that potential growth. I think historically, to go back for a minute to if you're talking about residential development and the pressure there, historically that's been essentially a net loss when you balance tax revenue versus services for the average, and I would say certainly the average new residential property that's going to be built in East Long Meadow. Net per pupil cost, I think, for this year is somewhere around $11,000 and change. Add to that police, fire, and everything else that comes with that. Even with those new, larger homes in the big subdivisions, you're not generating, $13,000, $14,000 in tax revenue every year. So that's a long-term challenge, I think, that the town faces in terms of balancing that growth and open space, commercial development.
And it's one that's hard to completely forecast. I think what we're seeing, probably the biggest associated expense with the new growth of the housing market is kids in the school system. And you alluded to that yourself. But right now, I think what we're seeing is that there's been enough decline in the population, student population, that with any new student population, we're kind of holding our own. We're not really growing in substantial numbers. In fact, I don't believe we're growing at all. I think we're still declining in student population. So that has allowed us the opportunity to limit the impact that the housing market has had on the overall budget.
So do you see things, as you look ahead then to the next, say, 3 years, you've got the free cash management where you'd like it, and you've been able, with, again, I think remarkable communication and effort on everybody's part, everybody focused on ultimately the same goal, to balance the budget again this year without that free cash amount. I think that that's a tremendous accomplishment, and credit to you, your both committees, and to everybody involved in the process. Is there anything that you see coming, sort of looming on the horizon, that concerns you in the 3 to 5 year time window that we need to be thinking about?
Yes. Employee costs are the #1 driver in government, and it's not anything different here in East Long Meadow. So you've got, retirement costs for the town. As an example, the Hampden County Retirement Board allowed communities to not pay a full assessment for a period of time when the economy was very bad. They're now on a 3-year catch-up. So last year, this year, and the next fiscal year, the town will pay an additional about $185,000 a year on that catch-up. You have, health insurance costs each and every year go up. So for fiscal year 14, we've budgeted almost another $260,000 for that. We talked about energy efficiency, but every new thing that gets added in the town and/or the schools is computer software, computer, and that just draws down electricity each and every day, and so that's going up. And salaries in and of themselves, go up each and every year, and so that's an expense that needs to be looked at. Those expenses need to be looked at each and every year.
And not to divert this into a discussion of the mechanics of Proposition 2.5, but fundamentally, the town is really limited by that. How old is that? 1981 or something?
1981. Yeah. The biggest concern with, Eric talked about some of the new subdivisions, and one of the good things about that is you get what's called new growth.
Right.
And the new growth are, new homes that come onto the tax roll, additions to people property, new pools, new decks, improvements to homes are all new value that get added. So that in that year. So that is on top of the Prop 2.5 increase. So this year I think we've budgeted like $450,000 of additional new value. I think that's a fairly conservative number. And you can't necessarily tell from year to year what's going to be, so we work closely with the Board of Assessors to come up with that number. So that helps us a little bit to kind of offset some of the expenses that we have, but that's always a moving number that you can't really count on. want to go back for a minute on the free cash. And, you know, we said that we feel like we're in a good position, and we are, and that's what has allowed us to probably do the most aggressive capital plan
Right.
for this year that
Done
we've
the last-
done in the last
last
7 or
4
8
years,
years.
yeah, easily.
And we're going to fund it all by using free cash rather than going and adding to our borrowing expense. So I don't know whether you might want to talk about that
Yeah.
plan.
Yeah, to answer your original question, I would echo a lot of what Russ said. The employee benefits aspect of the budget represents that, along with our insurances and whatnot, represents somewhere around 10 million of our $52 million budget. So it's a substantial amount. This year alone, FY14 alone, we're looking at increases in the retirement amount by 8% and in the employee health insurance by about 12%. Those are big jumps, and those are typical. Those are typical of what we see. And those costs are under very little control of ours meaning the town, but yet they're very concerning for our committee, because the growth is potentially unsustainable, and that worries us. As it relates to the more on the capital side, I think one of the other things that we have to look forward to is we're starting to suffer some of the growing pains that in the town in terms of, for example, we have some real space issues with the town hall and all the various town offices. At some point, the community is going to have to deal with that. Our government's growing. The demands on government is growing, and the requirements of government have grown, and our facilities have not. So at some point, we've got to look at that. I think no one would argue that a lot of our schools are aging, and at some point are going to need some facelifting or some improvements to be made to the physical plants of the school department. So a lot of those are big ticket items, and so down the road, when you talk about in the next 3 or 5 years, I think we're going to be faced with some of those decisions in that time frame.
And so any thoughts on how, you know, there's a limited number of approaches that you have at your disposal to tackle that looking ahead?
Well,
Want to comment on any of that, or just?
Well, you can.
And I know you're not just going to wait and see what happens.
Well, you can bond. Well, you can bond though. You can bond for construction projects, or you can do a Proposition 2.5 override as another one.
I don't mean to interrupt, but let's go back to the bonding, because one of the things that was mentioned the other night, and I think would be good for folks to know, is the decision to use what might have originally been, we went from 500 from free cash to balance the budget last year. The plan at that point had been to go to 250 this year. And at some point in your thinking, let's take that free cash amount and put it into capital projects to avoid raising
principal and interest, yeah.
Principal interest that we're already sort of at an unsustainable level. But I believe it's FY15, is that right? That's going to drop.
Yeah, the principal and interest payments will drop dramatically.
You just want to review those numbers in that time frame?
Well, and I didn't bring all those exact numbers with us, but I think that we were approaching somewhere in the 10% range of our
9%,
yeah, of our not of the free cash, of the finance of what we had in debt and interest, and we didn't view that as particularly healthy. That much of our budget was going toward paying debt and interest.
Right.
So the committee, by that I mean the Appropriations Committee, made a commitment to itself 3 or 4 years ago that we would try not to incur any new debt until we paid off some old debt, and try to keep that, the amount of debt that we owed, and we're not including the debt exclusion stuff. For example, Birchland Park School is not included within that calculation. That was a debt exclusion. So this is all out of the annual budget. So we wanted to bring some of that down, understanding we're always going to have debt.
Right.
It's unavoidable to operate a budget. but there's a healthy amount, and we're probably looking at somewhere under the 10% amount. So we wanted to pay down some debt before we started incurring new. That's created a real challenge for the capital plan. And that's why this year we weren't quite where we want to be on the debt and interest payments yet, but we realize that we've neglected a lot of the infrastructure over the last couple years with trying to avoid large capital outlays. So this year we made the decision that a lot of that excess money in free cash, because the capital is not a reoccurring expense, it's not a budget line item, so to speak, that it would be a good use of some of the excess funds that we have in our free cash amount. So it's gone to give us another year of not incurring any new debt to maintain our infrastructure.
And this will come up at town meeting, it'll be published in the warrant, but you have a quick rundown of the top 3 capital expenditures for this year. Why did you decide, what projects warranted you making that decision for this year?
Well, there are actually many. We are actually recommending, I got some figures here, we're recommending a total of $1.6 million in capital outlay this year. Now, not all of that is general fund expenses. Some of that is water and sewer projects of maintaining the infrastructure, water and sewer pipes and pumping stations and that sort of thing. Some is right here in LCAT, which, as you know, is not part of the capital, general fund capital. It's from funds specifically used for LCAT. And we're looking at, from the general fund, we're looking at about $1.2 million in outlays. Some of that money is made up with closed capital projects where there's remaining funds, balances that were unused that we can reappropriate to new capital projects. And just about $1 million of it is from free cash.
But Birchland Park School improvements is about $400,000. You have 2 new police cruisers every year, just to keep the fleet moving along.
In terms of projects, I mean, the fire department ran into some situations where some of their important equipment needs replacement. You're thinking of Meadowbrook Electrical up in Meadowbrook School has some serious electrical issues and some serious electrical problems. And we talked about the infrastructure needing that facelift. Well, here's part of a significant need up there, and that accounts for $400,000 of the 1.2 million. So it's a significant number. Everyone in town knows how the traffic lights at Elm and Mapleshade have been problematic, and when they create a serious public safety issue, particularly with the school right there and the kids walking to and from school. So that's another project that's being funded, so we can get those updated and upgraded.
Well, they're basically replacing the whole system under the street.
It's an extensive. Everyone just sees the lights, but what makes them operate is a lot of that is underground and under the roads that we drive on. So it's an extensive project to repair it. It's not as simple as changing out the lights.
And
but that's over $100,000.
Yeah, that is a $125,000 project. We have there was some issues with the HVAC system out at Birchland Park that's going to require some upgrades. The DPW vehicles, we have really held them to the line over the last few years with new vehicles. And in fact, one of the things the Capital Planning Committee is trying to look at is our fleet townwide. Everything from the fire trucks, police cruisers, school buses, DPW vehicles, and we're really hoping to develop some recommended amount of fleet replacement annually, so that we don't end up with unusually high repair costs, as well as the need to replace too many vehicles in any one given year. So we're looking at that now. We're examining the life expectancy of each vehicle and how it's used, and the departments have been really great at that. The school department has really looked at their buses and the replacement schedules they previously had. And with the vehicles that we're getting today, we're getting more miles out of them before they need replacement, so we've extended some of those replacement schedules and whatnot. and the departments are working really closely with us to try to develop some sustainable plan on the fleet replacement. So that's a lot of what we're trying to address with that $1 million this year.
You have anything you want to add to comment on that, or
No, I just think his committee does a great job, and we're normally setting aside about $250,000 in the raise and appropriate budget, which we didn't put in this year because we're using the money from free cash. So that saved us an additional $250 to be able to kind of utilize, for other services.
Now tomorrow I believe you're participating in there's a visioning process taking place around the school facility study, which was passed last year.
Right.
So that is underway, and there have been people around for the past couple of weeks taking notes. And so I think, just to go back to what you see again in the 5-year time window for those needs, certainly the town hall, the space study, and the school facilities. And you mentioned technology and really the role technology plays in education today and the demands that puts on infrastructure and software licenses, which are preposterously expensive.
The IT budget went up almost $60,000 this year, and the majority of it was an increase in the maintenance, software licensing agreements, and you have to have it to be able to operate. Yeah. So there's very little you can do about that. Yeah. But yeah, the space needs for the town will be a big project that will need to be addressed. The Appropriations Committee last year supported an article to bring in an independent outside consulting group to study the needs for town hall.
Yep.
There had been 3 previous studies that had looked at it. The town departments were coming to the Appropriations Committee asking for $15,000 here and $20,000 there to kind of do some changes in town hall, and we just said, time out, folks. I said, we appreciate your efforts, but we think an outside entity kind of needs to come in and take a fresh look at it. So they reviewed all the 3 previous studies. They went and they met with each department. They met with the boards that might oversee these departments. I know they walked most town buildings. And they have just recently released their recommendations, which I think we will get a copy of in a couple of weeks. But there will have to be some changes to town hall. We talked about new regulations and new federal mandates. Some of those require personnel to be able to do that. Therefore, the number of people at town hall has increased, not by a lot, but you are running more and more on software and on computers where you got a server room which continues to expand. Right. You got a server room which needs HVAC requirements so that the equipment doesn't break down. And so you have these things occurring that are not necessarily within the control of individuals, but you just need them to be able to kind of operate. And these same changes would occur in a private business. And in a private business would just make the changes. But town government is a little more complicated. You have to go to this board and that board, and you go to town meeting and so forth. And that's just the process, and you have to work your way through the process. But there will have to be some type of changes. The other thing is you've got a town hall right now, which is, space-wise is really dysfunctional. You have certain departments that cater to the public that are on the 2nd floor, where it'd be better to move those departments to the 1st floor so they can serve the public, specifically the elderly, in a much easier way. You have certain departments that have no interaction whatsoever with the public. They're really kind of taking up prime real estate on the 1st floor. So how do you move them, to another location in town hall so they're not taking up that prime space, which would better serve the public? So these are the things that we tried to ferret out in this $30,000 expense, which I don't think was a lot of money to do that. And so we'll have to review what the changes are and address them down the road.
And we'll go through this similar process with this 5 school buildings. and, you know, ultimately see what the recommendations are.
Yeah.
Well, the Capital Planning Committee was, obviously had recommended that expense last year because we felt as though by investing in the proper studies now, potentially would prevent reactionary, I mean, look around us. Minnechaug built a new high school, Long Meadow's building a new high school, West Springfield. So many communities around us have built new high schools that it's probably only a matter of time before the pressure is on within our community to do the same. We felt like getting out ahead of that and examining our facilities now in terms of the space, the infrastructure, and what alterations and upgrades would be needed to bring our existing facilities into the modern day need, to meet the modern day needs of education, was money well spent versus a reactionary, you know, let's build a new high school at the tune of $80 million.
So one of the things that, and I guess just having gone through the experience of this renovation project in the past year or so, from the standpoint of putting money into a study, hiring the outside consultants, you know, there's certainly was a lot of criticism of that in the discussion on town meeting floor. Mm-hmm. People said things like, well, you know, why don't you get a college student to do it? What I see, and you know, you could list probably a few, you know, high-profile capital projects in the past few years. It is an incredibly complex process. This, we renovated about 1,800 square feet. Mm-hmm. I think there were 22 pages on the blueprints, and you know, the binder of specs was about 3.5 inches thick. This is a relatively small project. Mm-hmm. The level of detail and the number of things that need to be gone back to is, I mean, it's just incredible. And I thought I had a pretty good grip on what I wanted and what I needed. And so this isn't really a question, but maybe a comment about how do your committees, or do you, I'm sure you do, think about, but how do you address maybe the question of managing most efficiently the costs and supervision, I guess I'd say, of these projects that really fall under state procurement, which, if I just express an opinion, is the most inefficient, non-cost-effective way for anybody to do anything, which I understand why it's in place, but it really does, you know, you made the comparison where the business would just go out and get this done. Businesses have a lot more leeway to exercise control over every step of the process and make what would be, on the government side, arbitrary decisions based on the outcome. Well, this is what we want, this is why we want it, and we're just going to pay for it and it'll be done. We don't have that luxury, but it does create, I think it creates a perception in the public that committees or departments or elected officials are mismanaging things, when really it's none of those entities that have control over the process. It's the way the process is defined.
It's an interesting challenge when you are when you're trying to oversee the public's money, the taxpayer's dollar. At the same time, you're dealing with some of the legislation that you referred to, such as prevailing wage and the competitive bidding laws and the construction bidding laws, right, that exist in Massachusetts. The two almost conflict. And you're absolutely right, but I think that lends itself even further to the hiring of the correct experts to help guide us and lead us through those processes and those recommendations. To me, having gone through several in my line of work, gone through several of those processes, I'm with you, Don. They're very complex. And without the right people guiding us through it, right, I guarantee we would spend 10 times that money that we spent on the consultants, if you will, in mistakes and overruns and so on and so forth. So I think it's important that we look outside to hiring the right people to help guide us through those, particularly those very large projects.
And the other interesting thing is that people need to understand is you have to go out to bid for a lot of these.
Yep.
And so, just your project, I mean, it started a number of years ago, but you started thinking about the project a number of years prior to that. So you said, okay, so you start putting together some preliminary numbers, and you start saying, this is what I think I'm going to need, this is how much space I'm going to need, this is how much new equipment, and that takes a period of time to be able to do that. And you start putting some preliminary numbers behind all of that. So let's say that takes 18 months to 2 years. So then you actually go out to bid. Then there's a bidding process, and you might get 3 or 4 companies that want to bid. Well, there's a length of time to do that as well. Well, guess what? You've just done 3 years, and the cost may either go up or go down because of the economy.
Right.
So you may end up overestimating what you're going to need, and people go crazy. Or the costs have gone up so much from your initial preliminary request and your bid that you have to go back and ask for additional dollars, and people go crazy. Really, it's a symptom of government, the structure, the regulations, the process. And my point about the business may spend a year saying, okay, these are going to be our future needs, these are going to be what we're going to need. And they may have a relationship with an existing contractor, and they say, okay, you're going to do it for X. And they do it. And there may be a little contingency built in. So it's much easier to do it, to make those changes privately than it is publicly.
And I think just to go back to the comparison that's often made, and people will say, and even people in government will say, in town government will say, well, we're running a $52 million business. Mm-hmm. But the distinctions are really significant as a practical matter. Mm. And I think to push that comparison and for people to have an expectation that town government can actually operate like a business is misguided, because there are so many things that distinguish the way municipal or state or any government entity has to operate as opposed from private business.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. There are a lot of things that you can do that are very similar. You can control your labor costs. You can make these energy efficiency corrections that we talked about. So there's a lot of things that you can still look at and try to run it as a business. And you can try to get the most efficient use of resources that you have. I mean, that's just a normal operating business practice.
And so I'm going to make a plug here for the DPW, because in terms of making use of your resources, yes, you want to hire the experts when you need to hire the experts, but you also need to be attentive and understand when you have the talent and the resources in-house to do the job. And I cannot say enough, just in the experience of this project, with how much, I can add up the money, and it's into the significant tens of thousands of dollars that were saved on this project alone by the DPW doing things that, had they gone out to bid, they did go out. I mean, the things that were just significantly more expensive, that the decision was made, let's use the DPW to do those things. And I think the senior center, Pleasant View, is another great example of that. So I think the town should just know, from my perspective, that another example of town employees, department heads, and boards really committed to getting the most value for the town out of their effort, the time they put in, and the decisions they make.
Good.
Well, anything else you want to wrap up with?
Yeah,
did we miss any?
No, I just want to make a plug for people to come to the annual town meeting. I mean, we are going to be spending $52 million.
Yes.
Those are your tax dollars.
That's $200,000 a voter.
Yeah. If you actually care about how your money is being spent, this is really the one location where you can see every expenditure. We've started putting the number of personnel under each department, so you can see how many school department personnel and, police and fire and so forth. You can get all your information. You can ask all of your questions that you might have about the town budget, and what it's going to mean to your bottom line paying real estate taxes will be right there on display. So my advice is come, ask as many questions as you want, because the way the structure of the town is set up, you are the legislative body. You are the people who approve the town budget for the next fiscal year. So this is your opportunity to come and be heard. So I would request as many people as possible to come. It's Monday, May 20th at the high school at 7 o'clock. Please come, please be heard.
Yeah, I would echo the same thing, that not just at town meeting, but I'd take it even further and say all the boards and committee meetings that exist out there. If you have a concern, if you at all care how your dollar is being spent, as corny as it sounds, this truly is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Russ and I are just residents like everyone else, who have gotten involved a little bit in the development of the budget, and that's really our entire government, and it's out there for you, the taxpayer, to come and participate in, quite frankly. And we love to see, we welcome more participation. We truly, we make a lot of decisions based upon our assumptions of what the residents in the community want. And if we don't hear anything from the residents, maybe our assumptions are wrong. So come get involved, and this town government really is for you, the taxpayer, and then come see it operate.
Yeah, and I would say, I guess that's one of the drawbacks to what we're doing now and to what we've been doing. And as informed as much as we hear that people watch all the meetings on LCAT, they're available. I think that's a good thing. But I almost wonder sometimes if it's just made it too easy for people. I don't see that interest in watching the meetings actually translating into higher attendance at town meeting, higher attendance at the polls. I've actually tracked that since we've started 4.5 years ago. I came in here all gangbusters thinking, well, this is going to be the greatest solution in the world to getting people involved and interested in paying attention. They may be paying attention, but as yet, I haven't really seen it change into action. The other thing is, there's a huge difference between watching a Board of Selectmen meeting or an appropriations discussion on television and actually being in the room with the people who are your neighbors, who you see at the grocery store, and understanding that it really is all about communication and that kind of interaction. When we didn't have any of this technology, the town meeting started in the late 1600s. The Puritans came, they actually got together in a room and said, this is how we're going to hammer out our self-government. It was the personal interaction, I think, that was really the basis of that. And so I would encourage people, turn off the TV and go to the meeting. If you've got an hour to sit and watch the Board of Selectmen, maybe get yourself down there. Introduce yourself to your elected officials. Show those people that you're interested. It does. Every elected official I've interacted with since I've been doing this, and they really appreciate when someone shows up who's never been to a meeting before. They notice, and they, can I help you? Do you need something? I would really encourage people to participate more too.
But you and your staff do a great job, because not a week goes by where I don't see someone somewhere and they go, geez, I saw you at the budget hearing, or I saw you at town meeting, and can you answer a question for me on this issue? And it's nice that people are paying attention, and so that's it's very helpful.
Well, good.
So
I'm
thank
glad
you.
to have you guys back, and
Sure.
This is great. It's I'm sure it will be an annual tradition, and appreciate it. I hope it's helpful to the viewers. So.
Good.
Thanks
Thank you.
for having us.
Thank you. Thanks.